Hey everyone on LinkedIn. I'm always a bit conscious about saying good afternoon because it's good afternoon here in Ireland, in sunny Dublin, where I'm broadcasting from. But where Cathal is, it's I won't say first thing in the morning, but it's the morning
Yeah,
time where you are, Cathal.
it
Um,
sure is.
welcome to this week's LinkedIn Live. This is kind of a short synopsis of the full podcast episode, episode 101, where Cathal very kindly interviewed me on the podcast for a change. So, change of scene, first time ever for it to happen. We had a brilliant conversation. It was over an hour long, I think, Cathal, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Really great, interesting conversation. I kind of shared a little bit about my path, how I came to set up Happier at Work, um, the career journey I've been on that has taken me to where I am now, and the fact that it is a journey. And I kind of shared a little bit from my personal side as well. So, in keeping with that, I'm going to hand you over to Carl. Carl will do a quick intro of himself, and then we just had a few kind of follow-up questions that came
Yeah.
in. Carl had some additional things that he's learned about me since, and he wants to dive into, and some stuff he's seen on social media as well this week. So we're going to kind of keep it in keeping with the full podcast episode. The full episode link is in the comments below. So if you haven't listened to that full episode, the link is in the comments below. Episode 102 came out earlier today. So a brand new episode coming out today, and that is all about the return to work, meaning after a period of absence, whether that is illness, travel, like myself, maternity, paternity, caring duties, all of that kind of stuff. So that episode is out today, wherever you get your podcast. So I'll hand over to Carl now.
Oh, thanks, Aoife. And firstly, thanks again for inviting me on. I really enjoyed our chat a few weeks ago, and
Likewise.
lots of my colleagues and friends on LinkedIn listened in, so they really all enjoyed it as well. So thank you so much. Yeah, just briefly about myself, Cathal Quinlan. I've been working in corporate for probably 20 years, maybe
It's
even
it's
more.
funny when you say that, because I say that as well. And I'm like, does that make me really old
I know,
when
I
I
know.
say
It feels
20
really weird,
years?
but then you go back and go, well, I started in 2002. I'm like, okay, yeah, it is 20 years.
Exactly.
So yeah, it was great to interview Aoife. But yeah, I've got probably a slightly different background to Aoife. Worked in Goldman Sachs for 10 years in London and New York. I absolutely loved that. It was a great experience. And then I went to Australia actually and worked for Westpac, and there also loved my experience. It was particularly I got to work a lot on employee engagement, leadership development programs,
Yeah.
customer experience. It was a really great. Aoife and I chatted about that. It was great because that company gave me a lot of exposure to different areas. So yeah, it was a great time. And now I do my own thing. I go in when I'm asked to companies to work on anything from, can you help us with a restructure, right through to we want a new purpose statement for the company. So that's a little bit about me. But in the same way as we did the episode a few weeks ago, we're going to turn this back onto Aoife because this is her
Back on
show.
me. Back on
Yeah.
me.
Now
Well, this is it.
Aoife.
It is my show, and usually I'm the one who's asking the questions and kind of doing the prompts and stuff. So it is a little bit scary to be on the other side of
Yeah,
that
well,
as
we
well.
weren't too bad the last time. We were good too. I was good to you the last time.
You
Come on.
were, you were,
It
and
wasn't too
hopefully
bad.
not too bad this time.
Oh, no, no, no. I've got a few little questions here. So, I thought this was a good question actually, and we didn't ask this in the podcast, but what would you do if you weren't? What would you be doing if you're not doing what you're doing now?
Do you know what? That's such a funny question, because for me it's kind of broad ranging. Like there's loads of stuff that I would like to do in my life, call them bucket list items. And there's kind of a range of things. Like when I was doing the editing myself on the podcast, I actually really enjoyed it. I love getting into the detail. I love kind of doing all the little snippets. Like I really, really enjoyed it. It just, for me, it took up too much of my time. So I ended up outsourcing that. And I don't know if I could sit there all day. Maybe I could, I do like spreadsheets. I love analyzing data and all of that. But one thing that actually springs to mind of, that could be a potential career for me is, and I just love the sound of this as well. It's like a forensic accountant. So it's going
Oh,
in
wow.
somewhere and looking at numbers and picking out the mistakes or trying to identify fraud or, things like that, where things don't quite add up and you're trying to find mistakes in something that someone else has done. Also, could I be an editor? Like that's when I was younger, I was always interested in books and writing, and like, oh, could I be working for a publisher sometime, finding errors or rephrasing things in specific ways. And something else I've always kind of dreamt of is being a director, like a movie director. Now, I
Wow.
think maybe I'm a little bit over the hill to get into that game at this stage, but like, when I think of those things, they're the kinds of things that I would love to incorporate into my business. So like, editing videos or spending a little bit of time and then realizing I don't have the time and outsourcing it. But it's, they're the kind of things that I'm really, really interested in. There's probably loads of other, but I think if I were to go, I mean, like coding or something like that, if I had my time again, I might go back and do some sort of IT degree or something like that instead. I'm not sure why I didn't do that actually, but I could see myself doing that, or like the forensic accounting. I think is a big one
You've
as well.
shocked
That
me
really
with the
springs to mind.
forensic. You've shocked me with the forensic accounting. I
Why is
was not
that?
expecting that. I don't know. I just didn't expect you to say that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's
The
something I
second
heard about
one's yes.
recently, and I just thought, and you know what, Carl, when I left my corporate, even when I started my most recent corporate role, I did some kind of outside studying through MOOCs. Coursera offers these massive open online courses, they're called. And I did one in Python, which is a
Oh
coding language.
yes, yeah.
And
I've
just to
heard of it.
kind of, because I didn't feel like I was getting enough challenge, I think, in work, and I just really wanted to take on an additional challenge. But then when I left corporate, I actually went on and did a bookkeeping. And at one point I was thinking, oh,
Wow.
I could become a bookkeeper or go on to do accountancy or something like that. I like numbers. And actually at one point, taking that course, I identified that there was an issue with whatever they provided. So they provided a set of accounts and another set of accounts. And I was like, the answer doesn't
Head up.
match the question. So you've actually made a mistake here. And can I highlight that to you? And they wrote back and they're like, oh, thanks for pointing that out. And I'm like, how has no one else pointed this out before?
Wow. Oh
Yeah.
well, that's very interesting.
So
I
I'm a bit
mean,
of a
but I
numbers nerd, I think is what I'm trying to say.
well, we talked a little bit about that on your
We
episode,
did.
but yes. Now, I've got another question. It seems, and I saw a few comments, I think, on this as well. Like people are very interested in the travel component
Yeah.
of what you've done. And I know, were you on radio or something recently? We're talking about. Oh no, was that you talked about working overseas or working while on holidays? But I know
Oh,
lots of people were
yes.
very interested in your
Yeah.
travel piece
Yes. Yeah.
on the
Yeah. Oh, I
podcast.
mean, geez, Carl, there's a few things to pick up on there. I was on News Talk last Friday, actually talking about imposter syndrome and
Oh yeah.
how to identify it, how to manage it. So that was brilliant. And Friday was it's one of those days in Ireland where technically it's not a holiday, but I think most people were sort of off. So I think a good few people tuned in, and good response to that. I was in Tenerife remote
Yeah.
working in January and got a bit of publicity around that in Stylist magazine and in the Sunday Times. And I suppose for me, one of the reasons I went was to understand more about remote working, because my clients are talking to me more and more about their employees and how, the challenges that they have if they're going to provide this hybrid working environment, if they're going to allow people to work abroad for a period of time during the year. And I think a lot of clients a lot of my clients are kind of
Yes.
moving in that direction. But in kind of my life in general, I have traveled a lot. It's something I've always been interested in. And when I left my role in London and to move to Australia, but to travel and to move to Australia, I traveled around Southeast Asia for 6 months, landed in Perth, and I realized I needed to unpack and actually settle down for a while. So I had originally intended to travel on from Perth, but actually I stayed there for about 8 months in total. Absolutely loved living there, but I don't think I could stay there long term. Traveled a little bit more around Australia. Like I pretty much seen everything. I was going to say all of Australia, not all of Australia, but everything that's really worth seeing
Yeah.
in Australia. I've seen it. Spent then a year and a half in Sydney and traveled a bit more on my way home. But I was in. I went to Fiji and Hawaii and New Zealand, and I went through the States. I went to South America, and like people are so surprised when I talk about Antarctica. Then I was in Antarctica for 2 weeks. That was incredible, once in a lifetime trip. And I went to the Galapagos Islands as well. But I think it's one of those things that people don't necessarily know. Like people who've who know me on the kind of personal side know that, but from a business perspective, I think there's a lot of people who don't know that I've actually spent so much. I've been to all 7 continents, and I spent, I think, in total about 2.5 years traveling independently as well, solo, not with tour guides, not with other people. It was by myself, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was your favorite place of all that
Oh
you've
God,
gone to?
everyone asks me that, and it's so hard to choose. I think it really depends. There's a place in Thailand called Koh Tao, and I love that, but I think it's got a bit of it's kind of gone downhill. It's got quite dangerous more recently. But when I was there, certainly I really loved it. It was just a really chilled out vibe. You could go on the beach and kind of walk to have a few drinks and walk along the beach to the next bar along, and the people were so friendly and everything. So that was really nice. I loved southern Argentina and Chile for hiking and scenery. Like, that was incredible, and I would definitely go back there. It was just amazing. And somewhere I haven't been that I'd love to go is Alaska, actually, just to see it, just to see what it's like. I know, like, I get that it's a huge place, but and it takes, I think, about a day to get from here. It takes about a day to get there, and it costs about €1,000 or something like that.
Wow.
So I'll keep that in the bucket list
Keep that on the
items for
bucket
the
list,
time
yeah.
being. Yeah.
Now, another thing we were going to talk about as well is being happier at work.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's the title of your podcast. My podcast is called Better at Work, slightly different, but similar concepts. We want people. You want people to be happier at work.
Yeah.
I want work to be better every day. How can you make it better?
I think what I was going to say,
it.
Carl, I think if people are happier at work, that makes them better. And if
Yes,
they're better
I
at
agree.
work, that makes them happier. So it's
Yes.
kind of a symbiotic relationship, let's say.
It really is. And I mean, I think you and I have both studied this a lot. We've had different guests on each of our podcasts talking about it. I know certainly for me, I learned a lot, which I think I mentioned this even on the podcast, with Bruce Daisley, who was the ex-CEO of Twitter in Europe. And he wrote a book called The Joy of Work.
Yeah.
And I love what he said. He goes, he said, having a friend at work helps with happiness. I don't know, what do you think on that? We didn't talk much about it on the podcast.
Do you know what? That's so interesting, because so when in my last corporate role, I was part of the engagement team. So we were carrying out rolling out the Gallup Q12 or 12Q. I can't remember what it's called, but one of the questions on that is, I have a best friend at work. And so there is all of this commotion, let's say, at work because of it. It was perceived to be a very American term, and you don't really call people at work best friends or even friends. Like, there was all this kind of debate about it, and I think there was a bit of commotion beforehand, and then when the results came out, there was a bit of like, oh well, in America it's a little bit more. They talk about having a best friend at work. And I think in general that the Gallup survey is more kind of American focused. And then there's the US, which is a little bit more focused on Europe and the kind of things that are important at work. But I do think, like, if I think back to, I mean, we can talk about happiness at work probably all day, and I'll get onto my journey and what I kind of feel makes me happier at work, or kind of, what the science says around happiness at work. But in terms of best friends at work, I do think it's really important to have someone to actually talk to about stuff. And I suppose I could approach that from a couple of different ways. So having a friend at work to talk to, and to kind of celebrate the really good times, and to have a close relationship with someone at work. I think that's really, really important. And when you don't have that, you really feel that it's missing. I think it's a huge contributor to our sense of belonging at work. And like, for me, belonging at work is one of the pillars that I look at in my business. I think it's really, really important to foster a sense of belonging at work. And I'll talk about that in a minute, how I do that. But I suppose the downside of it, and I've experienced this myself, where you talk, I suppose you kind of bitch and moan about things that are going on. And this has happened to me, and what you focus on tends to get worse. And what I noticed is, when those people that I used to go to lunch with every day and complain about everything, when they left the business for various different reasons, I wasn't complaining anymore every day, and things got better. And I just thought, isn't that like, and at the time I didn't really make the connection. It's only now when I'm looking back and I'm going, oh, well, things got better. And they got better because I stopped complaining about everything that was going on. And I focused more on how to make things better and focus on what was going well.
But don't they say as well, though, that we're often the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with?
Yeah.
So if you're around a lot of, if you're around a lot of negative people, I think then it does, as you said, you're in the canteen or whatever having lunch, everyone's being negative, then you're just joining in on it, and it's not a great experience at all.
Yeah. But it doesn't create a nice environment for people either. And I think, I've done that myself a few times, and I'm sure I've been on the receiving end a couple of times as well. But, as you grow, as you develop, things change and you realize what's going on. But for me, like the kind of one of the core pieces around happiness at work is values alignment, and making sure that people's values are aligned with the organizations. And I can see now, and again, in retrospect, where my values are really aligned with the values of an organization. So the company I worked with in London, they were huge into learning and development and investing in their people. They were really great at recognition. They're really great at the social side of things, like driving that kind of social side, challenging people, like, giving people really challenging work to do, but rewarding them, like supporting them, giving them the resources to be able to do that, and delivering on their promises. Like one thing or a couple of things that I realized from other organizations that I've worked in is when someone says something and they don't deliver on it, that really bothers me. It kind of bothers me a lot. And so that's something that's kind of fundamental to my core values. And when I don't feel that, I feel this sense, this kind of jarring, this is not the right place for me. I don't belong here. So that's the kind of the values piece. And I do work with organizations on that. And then the kind of second piece, and this came out from the research I did for my master's dissertation a few years ago in relation to fitting in at work and what that means and what drives it. But need satisfaction is at the core of that. So making sure that people's needs are being satisfied at work. And if you're a long-time listener to the podcast, you'll have heard me talking about that before. Satisfying our universal needs for autonomy, relatedness, and competence. But it's not just satisfying those, it's finding the balance, because you can have too much autonomy and you can have too little. So too little is being micromanaged, and I've been there, and maybe I have been a micromanager in the past. But too much autonomy then is you have too much freedom and you have a lack of direction. You're not really sure which way to go, and you can kind of be floundering a little bit as well. And then working on our strengths is the other element. So like really, I've had roles, and again, I talk about this a couple of times on the podcast, where I haven't really been working to my strengths, that I've actually been, my strengths haven't really been to the fore. And I did, it's not exactly a scientific poll, but I did a poll on LinkedIn there probably about a month or two ago, asking people whether they felt that they were reaching their potential at work. And 80% of respondents said no, that they weren't. Yeah. And I just thought, and I was at an award ceremony yesterday in London. I think you saw that on my social media. So I was at an award ceremony and I was chatting to a couple of ladies afterwards, and we were talking about this, and one of them challenged me back and said, so if people don't think that they're reaching their full potential, actually, they probably don't even know what their full potential is. They're so much more capable than what they actually think they are capable of doing. So there's probably even more potential in there. So another part of what I do in my business is helping people to tap into that potential. How do you get people to work to their strengths, to find companies whose values align, and to make sure that their needs are being satisfied at work, basically.
Yeah, love it. I, from my perspective and experience, I think a lot of people like to have a good leader as well.
Oh, yeah.
A leader is very important. They cast a big shadow in a team or in a company. And I've certainly seen where, because the leader is the one who really impacts person every day. I've worked in companies where I felt like I worked in a different company when I worked for a different leader. So
Yeah.
the leader's
It's
role
a real
is
shame, I think,
critical.
isn't it? Yeah, because
Yeah.
for me, again, going back to this idea of values alignment and what's important to you, and teaching leaders how to actually
Yes.
execute on that, I think is
Yeah.
fundamental. How to hire people for values, how to recognize people, how to make decisions around values, how to promote people based on their values, not based, not
Yeah.
looking at what they've done up to now. And like, again, we talk about this so much on the podcast, where you're promoting someone because they're good at what they're doing
Oh,
now, but you're not. You kind of fail to look at the potential of what they could do. And if you're promoting them to be a manager, would they be a good manager? Like, are they interested
yes.
in developing people, or are they not interested in
Well,
developing
yeah.
people? Are they just interested in getting better at what they're currently doing?
Yeah, well, and my experience in the bank here in Australia in particular, we did, and it was a great program actually. We were very proud of it. It was like you would take the leaders away for 3 days, really get them trained in all of the aspects of being a leader, and it was
Yeah,
fantastic. And the first day was spent on mindsets and behaviors.
yeah,
And it was like, as a leader, you have to have a growth mindset, not a
yeah, yeah,
fixed mindset.
absolutely. Yeah,
Growth mindset was so a critical part of
yeah,
the program, and we didn't even call it a program, we called it a way of working.
yeah.
And it
Love
was
that.
like,
Yeah, yeah,
you've got it, this is the way of working, and you've got to be in a
yeah,
growth mindset every day,
yeah,
and really understand that as the leader, you know, who you reward.
mm,
The every person in a team knows, they go, okay, well, he likes this person, I wonder why that is.
yeah.
He always looks at this report, well, he's obviously interested in that. So you casting a shadow throughout the
Yeah,
whole day. So you got to be mindful of
totally.
that.
Yeah. I think as a leader, what you do is amplified. I think that's kind of,
Yes.
it's kind of same concept, different language. But interestingly, Carl, going back to this idea of the growth versus the fixed mindset, I read that book and I loved it. And I was really trying to keep an eye out for whether I had a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. And what I noticed is I have a growth mindset in some areas and a fixed mindset in others. So for me, it's not just black and white, but it's about having that awareness and noticing,
Yes.
recognizing, acknowledging when you have this growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. Or I'll never be good at X, that's a fixed mindset. And
Yes.
the growth mindset being, there's always opportunity to improve, that you can always do something, you can always do something differently, you can always learn from your mistakes, you can always kind of growth. And again, something that just popped into my head, as a leader, it's giving people that benefit of the doubt. And like, if someone, especially if someone is new to the organization, you need to give them the support, and you need to give them
Yes.
the recognition, the acknowledgement that they are new to the role. And they can only get better, and they can learn from their mistakes, and not expecting them to hit the ground running and
Well,
know
you're
everything
so
straight away.
right. You're so right. And I mean, obviously, we're talking about happiness at work here. And I think you're so right in terms of being happy on that first day of work and the
Mm.
leader's role when you join a company.
Even
I
before, Cathal,
even before,
yeah.
yeah, it's
What is the
so
whole process
important.
been of the interviewing? Once
Yes,
you're hired,
yes,
do you get an email? Do you get an outreach? Do
yes,
you get something delivered? Probably not to your desk anymore, but to your home now. All
yeah.
of these things I think really matter, and they kind of build up to the entire employee
I
experience.
agree. I agree. And that's why, like, I don't know if you've read much on Dan Heath. I love Dan
Yeah,
Heath
yeah,
and
yeah.
Chip Heath.
Chris and Dan. Yeah, oh,
Yeah, and
Chip,
Chip,
not
it's
Chris.
Chip. Yeah,
Yeah.
they both
The
talk a
power of
lot about
moments.
power of moments. Yeah,
Yeah, I
and the
love it.
fact that, I mean, I don't know, for people in Ireland, they probably know the old John Deere tractors, but for anyone in Ireland, look up John Deere tractors. They have some of the happiest employees in the world because
Yeah.
they do amazing employee engagement work, and they do great stuff too. When the new, to your point, Aoife, when the person starts, you know,
Mm,
they're made a big song and dance about, right? It's like they're
yeah.
brought out to lunch on their first day with their boss.
Yeah.
They get given a little toy tractor to take home. You can imagine, like, parents going home with that to their kids, going,
Yeah.
I'm working in this place. The kids, they're really clever. They're bringing them all into it. But yeah,
Yeah.
happiness at work is, you and I, you said it there at the start. We could talk about this all day. There are so many components to it. And you come at it from the values side, which I love.
Yeah.
I look at it from, it's like, I look at it from leadership, and how do you get the
Mm,
leadership level right? Because that's going to be the experience someone's going to have every day at
yeah.
work
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
But I love it. And now
It's so
tell us,
funny what you were saying
yeah,
there, Cathal, about the something that I just remembered the other day, that when I first
yeah,
started in uh, one of the roles that I had in corporate, and I went in, and I'm sure we had like a team lunch and everything, which was great. Um, but I kind of, I'm this is just how my brain sort of operates. I went in and I was like, I'd love if there was something like a little booklet that I could have a look at and say, where could I go for a walk around here? Where is good to go for lunch?
love it.
What's the, all of that kind of, like a magazine. I'm sure I asked around and people were sort of like, why would you need that, or why would you want that? And so I didn't make it. Like, I was planning to kind of put something together for new people to start. And I think it was sort of, the idea was sort of dismissed, let's say. And so I just never took it any further. But it just occurred to me again recently, like, that is part of the onboarding, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
making
it's an
people,
experience. I mean,
here's an idea of where you can go for lunch. And the kind of,
yes,
if you're willing to spend 15 euros, you can go here. If you have a fiver, then you can go there. And, just little things like that make a huge difference, I think.
I totally agree. Because when you go into a new job, like there's nothing more daunting, right? I mean, like even for me, when I started at Westpac after 10 years working in another company, you're like, I don't know anyone. How are things done around here?
Yeah,
Every
exactly.
company has a
Yeah.
different way of doing things. It's like
Yeah.
you feel like, oh my God, how do I work? How do you do the performance review? Like, or like what they do things very differently. And sometimes it takes a little while. Like I think it takes a few months to settle into a new place.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
and
definitely. Yeah.
and I was talking about this with someone the other day because they were saying they were struggling a little bit with adjusting to a new place because they come from a place that had really great systems and processes, and they've gone to a
Yeah.
place where they don't have any systems and processes, and they were
Yeah.
like going,
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't realize how much I liked the
Yeah,
systems
it's
and
so funny, isn't
processes.
it? The things you take for granted.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. The systems
it's
processes place sounds like something that I would quite enjoy, and
you. I
not the
thought of you
bureaucracy.
actually. Yeah, I thought of you. Now I know as well you've been featured in some articles, and
Oh
tell us a
yeah, yeah,
little
yeah.
bit
That's just
more about
today.
those.
Do you
Yeah,
know what?
tell
That
us a
was
bit more.
that was just today, and I didn't know in advance. Obviously, I had contributed to both of them. So the first one, and again, this it popped up, I think, on my Facebook or something. I was tagged, or Happier at Work company was tagged, was thinkbusiness.ie. That's more about my business journey as a social entrepreneur and the change that I'm trying to bring to the community. But
But
yeah, and I
that's
was
a
really
good one to
delighted.
read. That's a good one for the listeners to read in addition to the Squiggly Career podcast, because then
Yeah,
people will get a really good
yeah, it's kind of
understanding of
the,
you.
yeah. It's more the kind of business side of things.
Yeah.
And then the other one, and again, yeah, just I think someone else tagged me on Twitter and and said, "Oh, really great article." And I was like, "What's she talking about?" I had to click back into it, and that was about toxic productivity. So this
Mhm.
kind of always on culture, like we always feel like we have to get stuff done, and there's such a focus on productivity. And I could be guilty of this myself, even in the podcast, talking about always doing stuff and how to get more done, because I love that. I just have this inner drive to get stuff done. But it's the article is looking at that from the toxic perspective, when that's just a little bit too much, and how do we move
Ah,
away from that, and how do we shift to more flexible working. And there's lots of kind of tips and tricks in that. So I
I'm
think if you
looking
just
forward
look
to them.
for toxic productivity Irish Times, you will find that for sure. It'll pop up, one of the first things on Google. Yeah.
I can't wait to have a read of that. I think a lot of people, I don't know, in America, you had said on the podcast you'd love to live in New York, actually,
Oh,
which are
yeah, yeah. When you said
you,
that earlier, I was like, I have to write that down again. Yeah,
yeah,
it's something I've always wanted. And when I left Australia, it was kind of like, do I go back to London where I had lived? Do I go back to Dublin where I'm from? Or do I go to New York where I've just always, it's just, for me, it's like, it's the dream, it's the big smoke. So if someone has a job or opportunity that they want to talk to me about in New York, then I'm open to that. But I was in London yesterday. You saw that on my social media for the British HR Awards, and being back there, like I lived there for 3.5 years.
yeah.
I hadn't been back actually in about 6 years. And it was so nice to be back. I loved, loved, loved living in London, and I would happily go back there.
Well, and I think as well, it just made me, the reason I brought up the New York as well
Yeah.
is just as we were talking about toxic productivity,
Oh, okay. New York.
having lived in New York, I love, like, it's a great place, right? And
Yeah.
but it's interesting. Maybe it's just a cultural difference. Americans, not all. I have friends in American friends who are like, I don't want to be working around the clock. But
Yeah.
certainly, I found in America when I lived there, it
Yeah.
did feel competitive. And now this is
Yeah.
10 years ago, right? It was
Yeah.
very competitive. It was like, I worked till 12 o'clock last night. No, I worked till 10,
Yeah.
and I worked all weekend long. And I think that that is, I mean, I certainly found that at the time going, oh my God, this is constant. And if you're getting emails all weekend long, I talked
Yeah.
about this on my podcast the other day, and we talked a little bit about a no-fly zone for emails over the weekend,
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
no-fly zone. And actually,
Just put on a delayed response or delayed
yeah,
send or whatever. Yeah,
because you don't
absolutely.
realize the
You don't
stress that
need an
that
immediate
brings,
response. Yeah,
but
it
it
does.
brings a lot
Yeah.
of stress to people if they're
Yeah.
getting emails on a Saturday and
Yeah.
a Sunday morning. They're always on, and it really, and so I can't wait to read your article on toxic productivity. Where
Well,
did you say that is? On the Irish
it's Irish
Times?
Times, yeah. So look up
Okay,
toxic productivity, Irish Times. It'll pop straight up. If
okay,
you're
I'm
in
gonna have a
America
look
at
at
the
that.
moment, maybe not, but hopefully it will. But yeah, I think like for me, that like what you're talking about, and I was about to say, it's they've created a work environment of competitiveness essentially,
Yeah,
like, and presenteeism. Like, I'm here and I'm doing work, and it's always great to read the comments on underneath Irish Times articles. And I was reading some of the comments on that article today, and one person was saying like that we need to take this focus on getting the time in. And I talk about this a lot. Like, it's not about the time in, it's about the outputs that you can deliver. And
yeah.
after a certain time, you're not delivering the same level, the same quality of output. So yeah, it's kind of taking that focus away, but also that as a leader, it's your responsibility to be a role model. And also, if someone is staying in the office, then the perception should shift from, wow, they're doing so much work, to, wow, they can't manage their time.
Yeah, I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. And I think like you hit the nail on the head there. It's about outputs. It's,
Mm,
I've always found that when I've ran teams or we're coming up with 17 different things we need to do for the next 2 or 3 years, break it down into tasks. And
yeah.
then I don't care what way people do them. Of course, I have a view,
Yeah.
but let them
It's giving
do
them the
the output,
freedom and the
give them the freedom.
autonomy, the choice
And
and
so
control. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so if on a Tuesday afternoon, someone in my team, there's a classic movie out at the local cinema and they really want to see it, do I care that they go to that and they might make up the time some
Yeah.
other time?
Mm,
No, that's the culture you want. So
yeah.
if they really want to see
Yeah.
that classic movie on a Tuesday afternoon, aren't they going to be happier coming in on
Yeah.
Wednesday,
But
Thursday, Friday?
But I think even beyond making up the time elsewhere, it's so long as their work is done that they need to do for that day, then it's okay
Exactly.
for them to take the time. Like,
Yeah.
I'm no kind of employment law expert. But I do understand that there's a minimum required number of hours or
Yeah.
something like that. Like, at the same time, if you take the law away, like for me, I think we should move away from that. It's about like what you're actually delivering, what's important. And again, I
Correct.
could talk all day about how to do that. I'm preparing a blog post and a podcast, solo podcast episode, all about productivity and like kind of creating frameworks around productivity and how do you think that. And it's no one size fits all, but it's how to understand yourself and how to
Yeah.
get the most out of yourself. And putting together like how to work with me effectively. If someone wants to work with me, then they need to give me deadlines, and it's better if
Yes.
those deadlines are short deadlines rather than long deadlines. So all of these kind of things about understanding yourself, I think, are
Well, I
really
think that's
important.
such a good point, and even back to your whole podcast on happier at work and squiggly careers, and even in terms of careers, we meet so many different people in our careers. And I
Mm,
always say to people, when I become their manager, say for the first time, I always think it's really, to your point, it's good to get to know each other. What's
yeah,
your style? So it sounds like your style
yeah,
is you like deadlines.
yeah, yeah,
And I think when I like to do that when I'm meeting new people that are in my teams, I go, here's my style. I really don't like surprises unless it's a big Christmas present. Like, you know, if something's gone wrong,
Yeah,
tell
you
me
need to tell
about
me
it
about it
sooner, right? You
sooner.
know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
And trust is a big thing for me, right? When you're
Yeah.
working with teams, right? You know, I have a phrase I like to use a lot. Trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
really
Love that.
important, right? So trust, you know, I really have to have trust with the team, and that. So building that trusting relationship, really important. But I can't wait. You've given me a lot of articles to read now. I've got to read these and
Oh,
see all about them.
you want to see my tabs on my iPhone, like 500 tabs, probably most of them are
I
articles
thought
that
I
I
was
need to
bad.
catch up on and need to read. I only know that it's because you can only open 500, and when you get to
Oh,
500 they're
geez.
like, you can't open anymore. Yeah, so that's how I know that, and it happens occasionally where I reach up to that number. Now, they're not all articles. There's some things that I need to save, and there are other various random stuff that I've opened that I just haven't closed. But yeah, it'll take a bit of
Now,
mental energy to go through and delete those.
now I know that we've gone a little over our
A
time,
little
but
over.
Eve,
God, we've gone so long, but I've so
but
enjoyed chatting with
it's
you.
been so good to chat again. Definitely, you got to listen to Aoife's episode. The two of us had a really good time, and it was great to chat through and hear all about her. And Aoife, again, thank you so much for having me on. If anyone wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm more than happy to connect.
And you should
And
be highlighted, like you should be tagged in the post above. So
oh,
you can just
brilliant.
click, yeah. So you could just click straight onto Carl's profile and connect with him there. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
but
Yeah.
thank you so much, Aoife. It was really great.
If anyone has any comments or questions, I haven't seen any pop up through
Oh,
the software yet. But if anyone has any comments or questions, I'd be happy to answer. And Carl, I'm sure you would as well.
yes, I'm
So
happy to answer any
yeah.
questions. Yeah, we can do that.
Brilliant. Thanks everyone for tuning in, whether you're live. This is the longest LinkedIn live I think I've done, but thanks, Carl, for the questions. So whether you're live or on the replay, thanks so much for your time today. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Aoife. Thanks,
And thanks,
everyone.
Carl.
Have a good Friday
Oh
night.
yes, it's Friday, so the
It's
weekend. See
Friday,
everyone.
yeah. Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah.
Have a good bye.